was young, they came Bollinger Canyon Road in a wagon with all their belongings, and then they moved down in the Moraga and they lived there for years. And they farmed there. They had all horses and everything else. But in the spring, where all the water came to for all of Moraga at one time, is where they broke their saddle horses, because horses can't buck in the mud. Yeah, I thought that was a good way to do it.
My grandfather came in here in about 1897, the way it looks. And my dad was born where the hacienda is now.
There's houses there now, but just the other side of St. Mary's, up that slope toward the trees, there was a house, just a yellow house. And that's where all those kids were born. Dag and John and there was 2 or 3. There was 7 or 8 of them. And there weren't many girls around in those days. So that was all they could in these hills. But where those houses are, well, just as you pass St. Mary's, you turn into a bunch of houses there. Or whatever you could grow. They didn't have any more water then, I don't think, than they do now, except that somebody, just like here, up there, it's still there, underneath a tree there was a couple of valves, this big around. And evidently, in that gully, they had enough water backed up there to save, to run down this way, to irrigate some in there. But this was all farming land all the way up there. You can see places where the land has been farmed. If you know anything about that kind of thing, I can see places where this has been turned because you tell the way they went and the way the ground is. And so here and up there, it was all belonged to some one person. They raised quite a lot of hay.
Well, my grandfather, how he got here on the property per se, he walked from East Oakland over the hills, and he found that, and he homesteaded it. He had to be about 83 or 84.
Okay.
He raised cattle up here, and he had 2 vineyards, and one was up on the hill, and then the other was back in what we call Ernest, where you go into Bollinger Canyon. He had, well, there was an orchard from the house here clear down to the end of the property line, and there was one orchard up by the vineyard and another orchard there. And he used to take and he'd haul fruit into Oakland, and of course this was with a team. He never did drive. He didn't have a, they used to go up through Redwood Canyon and over Snake Road and down on High Street.
Yeah.
But he'd leave here, go real early in the morning, and he wouldn't get back until the next day, probably.
The next day, dark. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the hay business, well, that was, of course, I raised mostly grain and hay on the ranch over there. I had some cattle, but it was mostly hay and grain. And but it got to a point there that it's pretty hard to survive in farm in Moraga. You were on marginal land, and you was competing with, we'll say that a grain farmer hauling barley over in the valley.
Yeah.
They were getting 20, 30, 40 sacks the acre. Well, you was here, if you got 10, you was doing good.
Yeah.
And the worst part of it was that they kept the controls on everything after the war even, and the farmer, unless he had good ground and had a very productive ranch, he had a hard time making it go, especially where you're competing with still the shipyards was going and everything.
When we were kids there, we picked up our money to spend was picking pears or loading the trucks with them. In those days, we put them in boxes. You know? It's not like today, big bins.
Yeah.
But you had to pick those boxes up and put them on the truck, and then take them down the road and put them on the big trucks. You know, the Don Monte bought them all.
It was the pears and the walnuts, diamond walnuts, and the diamond walnuts were down in Walnut Creek, and they would shake them off the tree down on the ground. They had tarps laid down, and then they would take them and put them in that big roller down there and knock off the hulls, and then they'd put them in sacks and tie them up in tow sacks and put them in this oven and get them just so hot you couldn't touch it. And that would kill all the germs and everything. And then they would take the sacks down there to diamond walnut.
Work that I would do either on my own with disking the orchards and like that down around Lafayette, or work for Moraga Company. And Moraga Company sure didn't pay very much, but it was an income. But I used to run the walnut shakers when you had to first come out on the tractors, and then both John and I worked the orchards for Moraga Company, and so you had to have some outside. We used to raise, well, you had to have chickens, ducks, turkeys, everything you'd want to think of. For the hogs and the cattle, so you live more or less off the ground, you know. But because if you depended on what you got off that crop, believe me, you'd starve to death.
Painted it, they put Moraga Barn up there. So, oh, the barn. Well, no, they didn't. They put Moraga Bar, B-A-R. And then the State Board of Equalization got after him because you can't let anybody know what you're selling in a bar, you know. So they gave him 30 days or something to change it. So he sent a guy and put an N after the bar. And so it's always been the bar ever since.
Creative. Yeah, that is wonderful.
But yeah, I remember it used to be a stucco building, and you know now I can't find an old picture of the place because the front of it used to have a couple of benches, and it had 2 gas pumps there if you wanted gas, and then what else was there? Well, Helen had a little chicken house out in the back because she raised some chickens. You know, it was just an old time farm-like in there. Yeah. little.
Yes,
right.
Ring
Well, that's where
Convalescent.
Tom Carroll, the old man, lived. TP.
I see.
See that ranch? I think they squatted on it and took it.
Yeah.
But it was in 3 parcels. See, Mamie Barnes had the one section down, well, just about where that Chinese restaurant, Mandel and Fowler or
Yes.
something. And then T.P. Carroll, the old man, he had the center, and then young Tom, his dad, Johnny, had the piece up by Miramonte High School.
Okay.
That's the S4.
Yeah.
Old Room of Shadow there in Walnut Creek, the old blacksmith, he made all these.
I'll be darned.
See, we had cattle, you know, up there at the bowling alley, and then Jack used to rent a piece over by the tunnel, to put them in there for the summer, and we drove them up Green Boulevard, down Glorietta, then down to where the nursery is,
Yes.
and we'd go back in there where Hank Boger was,
Yes.
and we'd put them through the fence and leave them there for the summer.
But that used to be, Moraga was quite a unique place because it was you had about a half a dozen small dairies there that milked from, I guess Carr and Sanders was the biggest dairy at one time, and the rest of us were small dairies. Everything was sharecrop.
Yeah.
And,
Explain what that means, everything was sharecrop.
well, whatever you produced, a share of that went to the Moraga Company, which was 1/4. So by the time you took the quarter of your share out of it, you didn't have much. But and you had to deliver the hay and the grain. And I don't know how they figured out on the dairies. I think they paid mostly rent, but some of them did some farming. But you had to haul, they had the big warehouses there at Moraga, and we had to haul everything down to the grain and put it in the granary and the hay and the big barns. Through 49, I went to work for Reams Construction when Reams first started in there, And that year we built the Green Boulevard in that. When I was going to school when I was up here, I used to ride horseback, and there was no St. Mary's there because they didn't start to build until, well, we were up here at 25 and 26. I guess they didn't start to build until about 27, something like that.
Yeah. So then you were here when St. Mary's was a training.
Yeah, that was during the war.
Facility.
Yeah, that was pre-flight.
Yeah, pre-flight.
Yeah, that was quite an operation because. Of course, the college wasn't too big then.
Yeah, no, right.
But when the Air Force moved in there, man, they changed everything. The buildings they built, they had one of the largest swimming installation that there was in the country, where they could train these fellows for ditching out of the planes and like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And all that stuff was all torn down.
Oh,
Everything. First post office was a little 8-by-8 building near where trying to think where Flutie's was.
barn.
The barn, just across the street from the barn there.
Yeah.
That was the first one there, and that was back in the, I guess in the late 30s.
Yeah.
But then they built a post office on the corner of I call
Street?
it Moraga Way. It goes to Green or to Orinda, right on the corner. And they moved 3 times, I think, in Moraga.
Yeah.
My wife first started out when she was delivering mail out of her car. The government didn't even have the facilities to have posts delivered to your mail. She drove it in her automobile. Then she went to work for Dickinson. Do you remember her?
Yeah.
And she was the postman. She went to work for her there, and then from there she stayed. Then she went to Moraga.
Yeah.
But,
And we had 25 volunteers at that time. Moraga was very interesting. Moraga was a very close-knit community as far as the ranchers, with the Sam Carrs, the John Sanders, the people up Bollinger Canyon. So they had a good volunteers, and the volunteer organization was a social aspect. A little while after that, they realized they needed more, so in about 51 or 52, I'm not sure of the date, I hired John Huff. Within the next few years, I hired Bob Ortland, Ray Gasperry, about one man a year. That's all they could afford. I came on in 1959. I was the 8th man hired, so you just see one man a year was hired. And at that time, when I was hired in 59, they already had the Ream station. They had one man at the Ream station, one man at the Moraga station. And at night, between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., they would have a sleeper. Volunteers were very active. I mean, you had orders. If you had a fire, you blew the big siren, you took the fire truck and you went by the Moraga barn. And that's where you picked up the volunteers. After 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there were ranchers. 5 o'clock, the local people came in. To understand how small this was, in 1959, when I was hired, there were 259 homes in the whole community. I mean, that included Ivy Drive, Ream Center, Ream area, Moraga, and Canyon. 1970 came along. We had a fire service, but we had no medical. 1970, we had a very interesting thing happen. we had an accident with a gentleman died named Dick Kurz, excuse me, was riding his kid's mini bike, crashed it, and cut his leg open, cut his artery. And it took 25 minutes to get an ambulance here. When they got to the hospital, his blood pressure was 0. Well, Jean Kirsch was with a local women's club, a society, and she was upset. She says, we need an ambulance. So the local service league, Moraga Service League, got together and went out door to door, gathered $10,000 together, and went down and bought a 1970 Dodge van, and that was our first ambulance.
Each teacher had a register, and in their register they had the names of all the children. And so the first 2 weeks of school, whenever all the other schools had started, they were excused, and they would go home and help round up the cattle. And that's the only district that I know that would ever do anything like that. John Sanders' name's in there, and Frank Sanders. Yeah. They had houses on Camino Pablo and Larch Avenue. They were houses. That was, and then some along Ream Boulevard, and they had started to build some along Ream Boulevard when I came here. When I started, and that was the population. And of course, School Street and down there, they had some houses in there, and then there were little ranch houses. See, at one time, that was all. Moraga was divided into ranches, little groups. And in order to go from here, from Lafayette to Moraga there, you had to open 5 gates, because the gates separated different properties. And at one time the teacher lived here in Lafayette, and she rode her horse, and she'd ride, and she'd have to open those gates to get over to the Moraga school. And we had 2 classrooms, and then we had an office and a storage room. And then we had a U-shaped hall that went around, and in the middle was a multi-use room, you know. And at one end was a stage, and on the other end was a projection booth.
And then we went to the old Moraga school down here.
Okay, tell me about that.
And you know, and nobody shows you that there was a barn in the schoolyard. You know, the church,
right,
now.
Yeah.
So we rode horses to the school, and then we just put them in the barn for the day.
For the day.
And of course, they wanted to go in because there was always plenty of hay for them to eat. All the farmers would bring hay down.
That's great.
And then when we got out of school, we'd take the horses over to the company yards. You know where they are down. Well, we call it the Moraga Land Company, but there's still the old blacksmith shop in there. We'd take them in there, and there was a big watering trough where they could get a drink, and then we'd take them home.
The Willow Spring School.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Well, I was second highest in my class. There was 2 of them.
Oh! I knew there was a punchline there.
We started Donald Ream School. First he sold it to us, and then he decided he didn't want to. So I took it into condemnations, and he was back east, and he flew right back in there. And we got the site because he had sold it to us. That was all right. And then we went over to Moraga, and we bought that site.
Camino Pablo?
Camino Pablo, yes. And it was a pasture in there too. And
there were no houses in there or anything?
There were no houses. And we just off to the road there in a pasture with a fence along there and cows in there. And we just leveled it off and built our school there, yeah. And so then we had 2 schools. stream, it became a K through 5th grade, and I had the 6th, 7th, and 8th down at my school at Camino Pablo. And that continued until we built Joaquin Moraga. And we also added a primary wing there and then an upper grade wing.
Moraga is beautiful, the climate and everything puts Moraga on a pedestal.